My son's wife shoved my wife into the wall in front of every guest we had invited into our home. My wife hit the wall with both hands. The room went silent. My son said it was an accident. I walked my wife to a chair and placed one envelope on the table in front of her. The color left her face. I am Warren. I am 65 years old and a retired structural engineer. I spent my career designing foundations meant to withstand catastrophic pressure. I recognize when a structure is compromised. Until last weekend, I believed maintaining family peace required infinite patience. I was wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The crystal chandelier cast a harsh, blinding light over our dining room table. Diane and I were hosting our 40th anniversary dinner. 20 of our oldest friends and business associates sat around the mahogany wood. The evening was proceeding flawlessly until the main course arrived. Monica stood near the head of the table. She completely ignored the assigned seating chart Diane had meticulously arranged. Monica demanded the chair designated for my former business partner. She wanted proximity to a wealthy venture capitalist to pitch her failing luxury boutique. Diane approached her quietly. She gently placed a hand on Monica's forearm to guide her to the correct chair. Diane whispered that the seating arrangements were fixed. Monica ripped her arm away. She planted her designer heels onto the hardwood floor and forcefully shoved Diane. It was a deliberate, malicious strike to the chest. Diane stumbled backward. Her shoes caught the thick edge of the Persian rug. Her shoulder slammed into the plaster wall. A sickening crack echoed over the soft jazz playing through the ceiling speakers. Diane slid down the wall, clutching her collarbone in visible agony. The clinking of fine silverware stopped instantly. 20 people froze in their seats. The collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Connor stepped forward from the hallway. He serves as a vice president of acquisitions for a regional logistics firm. He spins corporate narratives for a living, and he immediately attempted to spin this. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. He smoothed the lapels of his tailored suit and declared the assault a mere accident. He claimed his wife simply lost her balance and bumped into Diane. He lied straight to my face in front of 20 witnesses. He did not rush to check on his mother. He stood shoulder to shoulder with his wife, forming a united front of absolute deniability. I did not shout. Anger is a waste of tactical energy. I walked deliberately over to Diane. Her face was pale and she breathed in short, ragged gasps. I hoisted her gently by her uninjured arm and escorted her to the velvet armchair in the corner of the room. I assessed her injury quickly. Her right shoulder hung at an unnatural, rigid angle. The physical assault triggered my immediate, silent retaliation. I turned my back on my wife and faced the dining table. 3 weeks prior, Diane discovered her heirloom sapphire necklace missing from her locked jewelry box. The piece belonged to her great-grandmother and carried immense sentimental and financial value. Connor and Monica had stayed in our guest room the exact weekend it vanished. They claimed they saw nothing and suggested a housekeeper might have misplaced it. I did not involve the local police department. I involved Declan. Declan is a private investigator specializing in asset tracing. I required absolute, undeniable proof before I dismantled my only son's life. I reached into my breast pocket. I retrieved a sealed manila envelope. The heavy paper felt solid in my grip. I walked back to the head of the table where Monica and Connor stood defiant. Monica stared at me with cold, arrogant eyes, expecting me to apologize for the disruption. I dropped the envelope directly onto the dining table in front of her. The thud resonated in the silent room. I instructed her to open it. Monica hesitated. Her gaze darted from the envelope to my face. Connor scoffed at my directive. He reached for the flap himself. He tore it open and pulled out a stack of 8x10 photographs. The glossy prints slid across the mahogany surface for everyone nearby to see. The top image was a high-resolution still captured by a pawn-shop security camera on the south side of the city. It showed Monica standing at the counter. The digital timestamp in the bottom right corner read exactly 3 weeks prior. The second photograph was a magnified close-up of the transaction. Monica was sliding Diane's sapphire necklace across the scratched glass display case. The third document was a crisp photocopy of the pawn ticket. It bore Monica's unmistakable signature and her driver's license number. She had liquidated a $20,000 family heirloom for $4,000 in untraceable cash. The color instantly drained from Monica's face. Her arrogant sneer collapsed into raw, unfiltered panic. She looked at Connor. Connor stared at the photographs scattered on the table. He dropped the remaining papers back onto the wood as if they were burning coals. He opened his mouth to formulate a new corporate excuse. I raised a single finger to silence him. The gesture was absolute. I addressed the entire room. I announced that the anniversary dinner was officially concluded. I instructed my guests to collect their coats and leave through the front door immediately. The 20 attendees stood in unison. No one spoke a single word of protest. My friends of 40 years filed out of the dining room in a swift, orderly line, leaving their half-eaten meals behind. They recognized a point of no return. The heavy oak front door clicked shut. Only Connor, Monica, Diane, and I remained in the house. Monica started to cry. It was a pathetic theatrical display. She attempted to fabricate a story about needing temporary funds for a real estate investment. She claimed she fully intended to buy the necklace back once her boutique turned a profit. I did not listen to her justifications. I pointed my finger directly at the exit. I ordered Connor and Monica out of my estate. I told them they had exactly 10 seconds to cross the threshold before I called the authorities to report a felony assault and grand larceny. Connor realized the absolute severity of his position. He grabbed his wife's elbow and practically dragged her out the door. They vanished into the night without their coats. The house fell into a heavy, oppressive silence. Diane groaned from the armchair. The pain in her fractured collarbone was escalating rapidly. I grabbed my car keys and helped her stand. I wrapped a heavy wool shawl around her shoulders and led her to the garage. I settled her into the passenger seat of my sedan and secured her seatbelt. I backed out of the driveway and headed straight for the nearest emergency room. I gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. I believed treating her injury was a simple matter of utilizing our premium health coverage. I had spent decades securing top-tier medical insurance for our retirement. I parked the car outside the hospital doors, completely unaware that Connor had already compromised our medical safety net. The collision against the wall was merely the physical manifestation of a much deeper betrayal. I was about to discover the true extent of my son's financial treachery. The drive from our estate to Memorial Hospital required navigating 12 miles of winding hillside roads. Diane remained completely rigid in the passenger seat of my sedan. She used her left hand to pin her fractured right shoulder against her chest to minimize the grinding of bone against bone. We did not speak about the violent incident in our dining room. The immediate priority was stabilizing the physical trauma. I pulled into the emergency drop-off zone. The automatic sliding doors opened to the sterile environment of the triage unit. I secured a transport chair and rolled my wife directly to the receiving desk. The intake nurse took one look at the severe angular deformity of her collarbone and immediately classified her as a high-priority surgical candidate. I retrieved my wallet and presented Diane's premium platinum tier health insurance card. I had structured this specific lifetime policy meticulously before retiring from my engineering firm. It was designed to guarantee absolute comprehensive care without any out-of-pocket delays. The billing administrator slid the magnetic strip through her terminal. A harsh error chime sounded from the machine. The administrator frowned and manually entered the policy identification number into the hospital's database. She tapped the keyboard with escalating frustration. She turned the monitor toward me and stated that the physical card I handed her was obsolete. The digital record indicated the policy had been drastically downgraded to a state minimum catastrophic coverage plan. This bare-bones tier carried a $10,000 deductible before unlocking any medical benefits. I demanded to see the modification ledger. The administrator printed the policy history and slid the paper across the counter. The coverage reduction was executed exactly 6 months prior. The authorization signature on the document belonged to my son. 5 years ago, I underwent an intensive cardiac bypass surgery. During that vulnerable period, I granted Connor a standard medical power of attorney. It was a logistical precaution meant to handle routine billing disputes while I recovered in the intensive care unit. I never revoked the document. Connor weaponized that administrative oversight. The printout exposed the exact mechanism of his theft. The monthly premium difference between our original comprehensive plan and the new catastrophic plan was exactly $1,200. The insurance provider automatically refunded the overpayment difference. The ledger showed the routing number designated for the monthly refund. It was an external account registered outside my primary banking network. Connor had intercepted the policy modification notices, diverted the surplus into his own hidden revenue stream, and pocketed $7,200 over the last half year. He deliberately exposed his mother to extreme medical risk to fund his lifestyle. The administrator handed me a preliminary invoice for the required orthopedic surgery. The immediate reduction and immobilization of Diane's clavicle required an $8,000 upfront payment due to the catastrophic policy deductible. The administrator offered a pamphlet for a third-party medical financing program. I declined the brochure. I retrieved my personal checkbook. I wrote a draft for the full $8,000 amount drawn directly against the liquid assets of my primary holding company. I handed the check to the administrator. The transaction cleared instantly. An orderly immediately arrived to transport Diane to the preoperative surgical wing. I watched the heavy double doors swing shut as they wheeled her away. The medical crisis was managed. The financial treason required a swift and entirely different protocol. I walked away from the crowded triage center and found a secluded corner near the vending machines. I pulled out my phone and dialed Gable. Gable operates as the chief legal counsel for my corporate interests. He is a man who deals exclusively in aggressive litigation and rapid asset protection. He answered on the first ring. I bypassed all standard greetings and issued 3 consecutive directives. First, I ordered Gable to draft an immediate and total revocation of the medical power of attorney. He logged into the state legal registry portal and voided the 5-year-old document electronically. Second, I instructed him to execute a complete blackout of our health information privacy releases. Connor was instantaneously stripped of all legal rights to view, request, or authorize any medical or billing information regarding my wife or me. Third, I directed Gable to contact the senior fraud investigator at our health insurance provider. I supplied Gable with the exact date of the unauthorized policy downgrade and the foreign routing number Connor had used to siphon the premium refunds. Gable initiated a formal corporate fraud report while I remained on the line. The insurance company's compliance department operates under strict federal regulations regarding elder financial exploitation. They immediately flagged the unauthorized routing number for an active criminal investigation. The federal banking system automatically responds to these compliance triggers by locking the associated assets. The snare was firmly set before Diane's surgical anesthesia even took effect. Miles away from the hospital, Connor paced the hardwood floors of his luxury downtown townhouse. He poured a heavy measure of imported whiskey from a crystal decanter, attempting to soothe the sting of his unceremonious expulsion from my dining room. The rent on his penthouse and the lease on his imported sports car required constant aggressive cash flow. He pulled out his smartphone to transfer his monthly stolen premium funds from his hidden account to his primary checking to cover his upcoming vehicular payment. He tapped the banking application icon. The loading screen spun for an agonizing 15 seconds. The interface finally refreshed, displaying a stark crimson banner across the main dashboard. The available account balance read 0. A secondary notification box popped up stating the funds were completely locked. The automated text referenced a pending federal investigation code initiated directly by the insurance provider's fraud detection unit. Connor dropped his glass. The expensive crystal shattered against the floorboards, splashing amber liquid across the baseboards. The realization crashed over him with suffocating weight. His secret revenue stream was severed permanently. The federal authorities were actively tracking the stolen capital back to his personal identity. He opened his contacts list and frantically scrolled through his network of high-interest underground associates. The lock on his stolen cash flow initiated his immediate desperate scramble for untraceable capital. The consequences of the dining room assault had just begun to dismantle his life. The drive from our estate to Memorial Hospital required navigating 12 miles of winding hillside roads. Diane remained completely rigid in the passenger seat of my sedan. She used her left hand to pin her fractured right shoulder against her chest to minimize the grinding of bone against bone. We did not speak about the violent incident in our dining room. The immediate priority was stabilizing the physical trauma. I pulled into the emergency drop-off zone. The automatic sliding doors opened to the sterile environment of the triage unit. I secured a transport chair and rolled my wife directly to the receiving desk. The intake nurse took one look at the severe angular deformity of her collarbone and immediately classified her as a high-priority surgical candidate. I retrieved my wallet and presented Diane's premium platinum tier health insurance card. I had structured this specific lifetime policy meticulously before retiring from my engineering firm. It was designed to guarantee absolute comprehensive care without any out-of-pocket delays. The billing administrator slid the magnetic strip through her terminal. A harsh error chime sounded from the machine. The administrator frowned and manually entered the policy identification number into the hospital's database. She tapped the keyboard with escalating frustration. She turned the monitor toward me and stated that the physical card I handed her was obsolete. The digital record indicated the policy had been drastically downgraded to a state minimum catastrophic coverage plan. This bare-bones tier carried a $10,000 deductible before unlocking any medical benefits. I demanded to see the modification ledger. The administrator printed the policy history and slid the paper across the counter. The coverage reduction was executed exactly 6 months prior. The authorization signature on the document belonged to my son. 5 years ago, I underwent an intensive cardiac bypass surgery. During that vulnerable period, I granted Connor a standard medical power of attorney. It was a logistical precaution meant to handle routine billing disputes while I recovered in the intensive care unit. I never revoked the document. Connor weaponized that administrative oversight. The printout exposed the exact mechanism of his theft. The monthly premium difference between our original comprehensive plan and the new catastrophic plan was exactly $1,200. The insurance provider automatically refunded the overpayment difference. The ledger showed the routing number designated for the monthly refund. It was an external account registered outside my primary banking network. Connor had intercepted the policy modification notices, diverted the surplus into his own hidden revenue stream, and pocketed $7,200 over the last half year. He deliberately exposed his mother to extreme medical risk to fund his lifestyle. The administrator handed me a preliminary invoice for the required orthopedic surgery. The immediate reduction and immobilization of Diane's clavicle required an $8,000 upfront payment due to the catastrophic policy deductible. The administrator offered a pamphlet for a third-party medical financing program. I declined the brochure. I retrieved my personal checkbook. I wrote a draft for the full $8,000 amount drawn directly against the liquid assets of my primary holding company. I handed the check to the administrator. The transaction cleared instantly. An orderly immediately arrived to transport Diane to the preoperative surgical wing. I watched the heavy double doors swing shut as they wheeled her away. The medical crisis was managed. The financial treason required a swift and entirely different protocol. I walked away from the crowded triage center and found a secluded corner near the vending machines. I pulled out my phone and dialed Gable. Gable operates as the chief legal counsel for my corporate interests. He is a man who deals exclusively in aggressive litigation and rapid asset protection. He answered on the first ring. I bypassed all standard greetings and issued 3 consecutive directives. First, I ordered Gable to draft an immediate and total revocation of the medical power of attorney. He logged into the state legal registry portal and voided the 5-year-old document electronically. Second, I instructed him to execute a complete blackout of our health information privacy releases. Connor was instantaneously stripped of all legal rights to view, request, or authorize any medical or billing information regarding my wife or me. Third, I directed Gable to contact the senior fraud investigator at our health insurance provider. I supplied Gable with the exact date of the unauthorized policy downgrade and the foreign routing number Connor had used to siphon the premium refunds. Gable initiated a formal corporate fraud report while I remained on the line. The insurance company's compliance department operates under strict federal regulations regarding elder financial exploitation. They immediately flagged the unauthorized routing number for an active criminal investigation. The federal banking system automatically responds to these compliance triggers by locking the associated assets. The snare was firmly set before Diane's surgical anesthesia even took effect. Miles away from the hospital, Connor paced the hardwood floors of his luxury downtown townhouse. He poured a heavy measure of imported whiskey from a crystal decanter, attempting to soothe the sting of his unceremonious expulsion from my dining room. The rent on his penthouse and the lease on his imported sports car required constant aggressive cash flow. He pulled out his smartphone to transfer his monthly stolen premium funds from his hidden account to his primary checking to cover his upcoming vehicular payment. He tapped the banking application icon. The loading screen spun for an agonizing 15 seconds. The interface finally refreshed, displaying a stark crimson banner across the main dashboard. The available account balance read 0. A secondary notification box popped up stating the funds were completely locked. The automated text referenced a pending federal investigation code initiated directly by the insurance provider's fraud detection unit. Connor dropped his glass. The expensive crystal shattered against the floorboards, splashing amber liquid across the baseboards. The realization crashed over him with suffocating weight. His secret revenue stream was severed permanently. The federal authorities were actively tracking the stolen capital back to his personal identity. He opened his contacts list and frantically scrolled through his network of high-interest underground associates. The lock on his stolen cash flow initiated his immediate desperate scramble for untraceable capital. The consequences of the dining room assault had just begun to dismantle his life. I guided Diane through the front door of our silent house. The digital clock on the hallway console, glowing red in the darkness, indicated it was past 3 in the morning. I assisted her into the master bedroom. I elevated her right arm using 2 firm orthopedic pillows. I administered the prescribed pain medication, ensuring she swallowed it with a full glass of water. I waited exactly 20 minutes until her breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of a medically induced sleep. I left the bedroom door slightly open to monitor her condition and walked silently down the hallway. I bypassed the main living area and headed straight for the basement staircase. My career as a structural engineer taught me to always maintain a redundancy protocol. You never rely on a single support column. I applied this identical logic to my financial planning. I descended into the climate-controlled sublevel where I kept a specialized floor safe anchored directly into the concrete foundation. I installed this unit 10 years ago during a major home renovation. The vault utilized a high-grade biometric scanner requiring my specific right thumbprint to disengage the heavy steel locking bolts. I approached the safe kneeling on the cold cement. I pressed my thumb against the illuminated glass panel. The scanner beeped a soft note of acceptance. The internal mechanisms clicked, and the heavy door swung open on its reinforced hinges. I reached inside the dark cavity expecting the familiar weight of the fireproof lockbox. My hand met empty air. I grabbed a flashlight from the nearby workbench and aimed the beam directly into the steel compartment. The space was completely barren. The lockbox containing $200,000 in untraceable bearer bonds was gone. I remained kneeling on the concrete floor. The cold seeped through my trousers, but I did not move. I did not yell or strike the wall. Panic is a reaction reserved for men who lack a plan. I simply stared at the empty space, processing the logistics of the breach. Those bearer bonds represented our ultimate fail-safe. They were purchased incrementally over a decade, utilizing annual corporate bonuses. I kept them physical and untraceable, specifically to bypass any digital banking grid failures. Only 3 people knew that safe existed: Diane, Connor, and myself. I ran my flashlight over the biometric scanner module. There were no signs of forced entry, no scratches on the steel casing, no damage to the concrete anchor points. The safe had been opened legitimately. The method of entry crystallized in my mind with terrifying clarity. 7 months ago, my central home network required a massive hardware upgrade. Connor offered to install the new router and sync our smart home devices. I allowed him unrestricted access to the administrative network panel. The biometric safe interface was hardwired into that exact network for firmware updates. He used his administrative access to extract my encrypted fingerprint data from the router cache. He mapped my biometric signature and bypassed the physical security protocol without ever needing to steal my actual keys. He robbed me while sitting at my own dining room table drinking my coffee. I stood up and closed the empty safe. I locked the heavy steel door. I walked upstairs to my private study and booted up my encrypted laptop. A lesser man would have driven to his son's townhouse and demanded answers. A lesser man would have called the police and initiated a messy public domestic dispute. I operate differently. You do not argue with a thief who has already proven his willingness to exploit your physical security. You trace the stolen capital and you crush the network he used to hide it. I opened a secure messaging application and typed a single coded sentence to a contact listed only as Declan. Declan operates as a private investigator operating out of a heavily fortified office in Chicago. He is a former federal forensic accountant who transitioned into the private sector. He specializes exclusively in offshore asset tracing and aggressive digital asset recovery. He does not ask moral questions. He simply locates missing capital for a substantial premium. Declan called my secure line within 4 minutes of receiving my message. I provided him with the precise serial numbers of the missing bearer bonds. I authorized a blank check for his operational expenses. I gave him a 48-hour deadline to locate the exact destination of the stolen funds. The waiting period required absolute discipline. I spent the next 2 days caring for Diane. She remained entirely unaware of the missing bonds. I cooked her meals. I managed her pain medication schedule. I answered phone calls from concerned friends inquiring about the anniversary dinner disaster. I maintained a facade of a devoted husband solely focused on his wife's recovery. I ignored every single incoming call and text message from Connor. He attempted to contact me 22 times. He was desperate to gauge my reaction to the frozen health insurance premiums. I gave him nothing but silence. Declan transmitted his preliminary findings exactly 39 hours after my initial request. The digital dossier arrived via an encrypted file drop. I opened the report in my study. Declan is thorough. He tracked the serial numbers of the bearer bonds through a labyrinth of international clearinghouses. The physical bonds had been cashed out at a boutique financial institution in the Cayman Islands. The capital was immediately converted into digital currency. The trail ended at a high-risk cryptocurrency brokerage platform. The account holding the converted funds was not registered under Connor's name. It was registered under Monica's maiden name. Declan breached the brokerage's public ledger to analyze the transaction history. The data painted a picture of absolute financial carnage. Monica had leveraged the stolen $200,000 to engage in aggressive, high-frequency margin trading. She bet heavily on volatile, obscure digital assets, hoping for a massive return to cover the failing luxury boutique. Her gambling strategy was disastrous. The market had turned against her positions violently. The offshore account was currently operating at a catastrophic 90% loss. The remaining capital was locked in underwater margin calls. She owed the brokerage firm significantly more money than the account held. If the market dropped another 2%, The brokerage would automatically liquidate her positions and issue a demand for the negative balance. I stared at the glowing screen, the puzzle pieces locked together with flawless precision. This catastrophic financial hemorrhage explained everything. It explained why Monica was desperate enough to steal Diane's sapphire necklace and sell it to a low-end pawn shop. It explained why Connor downgraded our health insurance to pocket a miserable $1,200 a month. They were drowning in margin debt, and the brokerage was demanding immediate liquidity. I refused to let a faceless offshore brokerage reap the benefits of my son's theft. I contacted Declan immediately. I instructed him to establish a proxy financial entity registered under an anonymous holding corporation in Delaware. I wired the necessary capital into the new proxy account. I directed Declan to approach the cryptocurrency brokerage representing this new aggressive debt acquisition firm. Declan executed the maneuver flawlessly. The brokerage was eager to offload a high-risk underwater retail account. Declan's proxy firm purchased the entirety of Monica's margin debt at a slight premium. The transaction was finalized digitally within 6 hours. The brokerage transferred all legal rights to the debt collection over to my anonymous holding company. I was no longer just the victim of a burglary. I was now the sole legal owner of my daughter-in-law's catastrophic financial liabilities. I owned her margin calls. I sat back in my leather desk chair. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. I did not need to ask for my money back. I possessed the legal authority to seize it directly from her remaining assets. I opened the administrative portal for the proxy debt collection firm. I selected Monica's account profile. I bypassed the standard automated warning protocols. I initiated an immediate and total demand for liquidation of all her remaining margin positions. The system executed the command instantly. Monica's trading account was wiped to zero. The platform automatically generated a massive negative balance notice and transmitted it directly to her personal email and phone. She now owed my proxy firm an exorbitant sum of money payable within 24 hours or face immediate legal asset seizure. The digital trap snapped shut with devastating force. My phone vibrated on the desk. It was an incoming call from Connor. He was no longer asking about the health insurance. He was calling to announce he was coming over to the house tomorrow morning. He stated he was bringing a property appraiser to discuss a loan against my estate. The desperation had mutated into a blatant attempt to steal the roof over my head. I let the phone ring out and prepared the driveway for his arrival. The morning light barely pierced the heavy curtains of my private study, where I sat monitoring the perimeter security feeds. Diane rested upstairs in the master bedroom, heavily sedated to manage the grinding pain of her fractured collarbone. The house was wrapped in a protective silence until the sharp chime of the front gate intercom broke the stillness. I checked the monitor and observed Connor standing beside his imported sports car. He was not alone. A man wearing an ill-fitting beige suit stood next to him, clutching a scuffed leather briefcase. I remotely disengaged the gate lock and walked to the front door to await their approach. Connor bounded up the porch steps with an expression of deep manufactured concern plastered across his face. He asked about his mother and claimed he had been awake all night worrying about her condition. He stated he was absolutely horrified by the astronomical medical bills I must be facing due to her emergency surgery. He pitched his solution before even crossing the threshold. He offered to leverage his own pristine credit to refinance our estate. He claimed this maneuver would generate immediate liquid capital to help cover Diane's extensive recovery costs. It was a staggering display of audacity. My son was standing on my porch offering to solve a financial crisis he had personally engineered by stealing our health insurance premiums. I gestured for them to enter and instructed them to keep their voices low. Connor stepped into the foyer and introduced the man in the beige suit as an independent property appraiser. He claimed he brought the expert along to expedite the refinancing paperwork and secure the absolute best possible loan terms for the family. The man extended a sweaty palm and introduced himself as Thomas. I did not shake his hand. I recognized him instantly. He was Monica's cousin from her mother's side of the family. 3 years ago, this exact man was the primary subject of a massive regional real estate scandal. He had his broker license permanently revoked by the state board for orchestrating a predatory deed theft ring. He targeted elderly homeowners using convoluted loan agreements to trick vulnerable citizens into signing away the equity of their lifelong properties. Connor was bringing a documented fraudster into my home to execute the exact same predatory scheme against his own father. I did not reveal my recognition or my absolute disgust. I allowed my shoulders to slump forward. I adopted the posture of a tired, overwhelmed old man, desperate for his son's assistance. I thanked Connor for stepping up to take the burden off my shoulders during a family emergency. Thomas opened his briefcase and pulled out a digital laser measuring device. He began walking through the ground floor, aiming the red laser at random walls and jotting down meaningless numbers on a yellow legal pad. As a career structural engineer, I watched him fake his profession with clinical detachment. He measured a primary load bearing column and recorded it as standard drywall. He ignored the custom foundation supports and the reinforced steel framework that made the house a fortress. He was putting on a pathetic theatrical performance for an audience of one. Connor trailed closely behind him, pointing out the vaulted ceilings and the imported marble countertops, attempting to artificially inflate the supposed value of the estate. I followed them silently, playing the role of the grateful, naive patriarch. We ended the tour back in my private study. Thomas slapped his legal pad onto my heavy oak desk and declared the property was a prime candidate for a maximum equity withdrawal. He reached deep into his briefcase and produced a thick stack of legal documents stapled together with a heavy binding. Connor took over the presentation to seal the trap. He flipped through the dense pages of legal jargon and confidently summarized the agreement. He explained that I only needed to sign the final page to authorize the bank to initiate the refinancing process. He promised the funds would be deposited directly into my checking account within 48 hours. I pulled the heavy document toward me and scanned the dense paragraphs. It was not a loan authorization. It was a comprehensive quitclaim deed. Connor had buried a total transfer of ownership agreement beneath 50 pages of irrelevant banking boilerplate. If I signed the dotted line, I would be legally transferring the entire estate to a faceless shell corporation controlled entirely by Monica and Connor. I let out a heavy sigh and nodded slowly, as if I completely trusted his explanation. I reached into my desk drawer. I bypassed the gold-plated fountain pens and selected a simple black ballpoint pen from my old drafting days. This specific pen utilized a highly specialized thermal friction ink designed for temporary architectural blueprints. The chemical composition of the ink is extremely unstable. It completely evaporates when exposed to minor ambient heat or after 12 hours of standard atmospheric exposure, leaving absolutely no trace on the paper. I uncapped the pen and leaned over the desk. I deliberately signed my full legal name on the transfer line, pressing firmly to ensure a clean stroke. Connor watched the dark black ink flow onto the paper, and his eyes widened with greedy anticipation. He was watching his father willingly surrender a multi-million-dollar asset. I handed the document back to Thomas. Thomas shoved the paperwork into his briefcase and clicked the brass locks shut with a sharp snap. Connor thanked me profusely and promised that he would handle all the stressful details moving forward. They practically ran out of the study and rushed out the front door, eager to finalize their monumental theft. Connor and Thomas drove directly toward the county clerk office downtown. They needed to file the quitclaim deed before the municipal building closed for the weekend to legally bind the transfer of the estate. They sat in heavy local traffic for over an hour, with the briefcase resting on the heated floorboards of Connor's sports car. The ambient temperature inside the vehicle, combined with the passing of time, initiated the rapid chemical breakdown of the specialized ink. I sat at my desk and visualized their journey. I knew exactly how the physics of the ink worked, and I knew exactly what awaited them at the municipal building. They walked into the records department and approached the filing desk with supreme arrogance, expecting to walk out as the new legal owners of my home. Connor handed the thick stack of documents to the county clerk and requested an expedited property transfer. The clerk accepted the heavy paperwork and flipped directly to the final page to verify the authorization signature and the notary seal. The clerk stopped and frowned. The signature line was entirely empty. The friction ink had vanished completely, leaving behind pristine white paper. Connor panicked and reached across the counter to grab the document. He stared at the blank space where he had personally watched me sign my name just hours prior. He loudly accused the clerk of tampering with the file and demanded to see a department supervisor. The commotion drew the attention of the senior staff. The supervisor approached the counter and immediately recognized Thomas from previous regional bulletins regarding real estate scams. The supervisor pressed a silent alarm under the desk and flagged the submission. Municipal security officers approached the counter and informed Connor and Thomas that attempting to file a blank, unverified public document was a direct violation of municipal code and highly suspicious given Thomas's documented criminal history. They were escorted out of the building under the threat of a formal citation and a potential fraud investigation. Connor stood on the concrete sidewalk outside the clerk office holding a worthless stack of blank paper. His attempt to steal my home evaporated just like the ink. He had failed to secure the massive capital injection required to cover his catastrophic margin debt, and his options were completely exhausted. Connor wore his executive title like a crown. He served as the vice president of acquisitions at a prominent Midwestern logistics firm. He printed his credentials on heavy cardstock and left them scattered across my coffee table during Sunday dinners. He utilized his corporate vocabulary to assert dominance over his mother and me. He constantly referenced his quarterly projections to dismiss my career as a simple builder of foundations. He constructed his entire identity on the illusion of indispensable corporate power. His corner office overlooked the downtown financial district. He demanded absolute obedience from his staff. He leased imported vehicles and financed luxury watches based entirely on the anticipated annual bonuses tied to his primary shipping vendor. He believed his executive position shielded him from all consequences. He was completely oblivious to the structural reality of the supply chain he managed every day. 40 years of structural engineering generated significant surplus capital for my family. I never purchased luxury vehicles or beachfront vacation homes. I built blind trusts. Diversification was my concrete foundation. 2 decades ago, I quietly acquired a majority shareholder position in a regional trucking syndicate. That syndicate evolved over the years into a massive freight contractor. Connor relied on that specific contractor for 60% of his department inbound revenue. He built his entire corporate reputation by managing the massive volume provided by this single entity. He thought he was negotiating with faceless board members in another state. He never realized his entire career rested in the palm of my hand. The corporate veil is an impenetrable shield if constructed correctly. My ownership was buried beneath 3 layers of holding companies, making it invisible to standard audits. I sat in my private study and initiated the sequence. I placed a secure call to the acting director of the freight contractor. I bypassed the standard quarterly review process and issued a direct shareholder mandate. I ordered the immediate termination of their exclusive contract with the firm Connor managed. The director asked for a documented reason to satisfy their internal corporate bylaws. I dictated the exact phrasing over the phone. We cited irreconcilable operational vulnerabilities and gross negligence specifically localized within the acquisitions department. The termination notice was drafted, printed, and certified within the hour. It was delivered via bonded courier directly to the desk of the chief executive officer at the firm Connor worked for. The language was deliberately engineered to isolate the blame entirely on my son. It protected the broader logistics firm while placing a massive target directly on his back. The chief executive officer read the termination notice and immediately halted all outbound shipments. The loss of their primary freight provider represented a catastrophic blow to their quarterly earnings. He bypassed standard management channels and called an emergency board meeting. He summoned Connor directly to the executive suite. Connor was sitting at his mahogany desk browsing real estate listings when his phone buzzed. He walked into the boardroom expecting a routine strategy discussion. He was met with silence and a printed copy of the termination letter. He stared at the words, "gross negligence." The panic set in immediately. He realized his corporate shield was fracturing. He asked for a 2-hour recess to gather his department files and prepare a comprehensive defense. The executive board granted him the time. They expected a logical explanation for the sudden disaster. Connor sprinted back to his office. He locked the door and pulled the window blinds down. Connor was hiding more than just incompetence. He had been quietly manipulating his departmental ledger for months. He used company expense accounts to camouflage the bleeding margins from the offshore cryptocurrency disasters his wife created. He funneled corporate vendor allowances into blind digital wallets to keep his own lifestyle afloat. The impending internal audit caused by the contract termination would expose his embezzlement instantly. He booted up his workstation and began fabricating projection metrics. He altered spreadsheets to hide the missing capital. He created fake vendor invoices to balance the internal ledger. He built a digital house of cards designed to deceive the executive board just long enough for him to secure his annual bonus and resign. He compiled the fraudulent data into a polished presentation. He saved the file and prepared to return to the boardroom. He believed he was outsmarting an entire room of seasoned financial executives. He completely forgot about Declan. Declan does not sleep when an operation is active. Declan had maintained persistent surveillance on the digital footprint Connor left behind since the empty safe incident. He monitored the traffic flowing out of the townhouse and the corporate office. When Connor accessed the company server to alter the spreadsheets, Declan intercepted the session data. He captured the original unedited financial ledgers before Connor could overwrite them. He watched the fabricated presentation compile in real time. Declan gathered the raw, disastrous financial data, detailing every single unauthorized transfer and phantom vendor invoice. He packaged the undeniable proof of corporate embezzlement into a clean digital portfolio. 3 minutes before Connor walked back into the executive boardroom, Declan bypassed the company firewall and forwarded the portfolio directly to the private inbox of the chief executive officer. Connor stood at the head of the polished boardroom table. He connected his laptop to the overhead projector. He smoothed his silk tie and began his fabricated defense. He spoke smoothly about temporary market fluctuations and miscommunications with the freight vendor. He pointed to his altered spreadsheets with absolute confidence. The chief executive officer did not look at the projection screen. He stared down at his tablet. He opened the portfolio Declan had just delivered. He cross-referenced the polished presentation Connor delivered with the raw forensic data exposing the stolen funds. The chief executive officer interrupted Connor mid-sentence. He turned his tablet around and slid it across the heavy wooden table. He demanded Connor explain the $250,000 systematically siphoned from the vendor allowance accounts into untraceable offshore wallets. The corporate mask shattered completely. Connor stared at the tablet. The exact dates and amounts of his theft were highlighted in bright yellow ink on the screen. He looked around the room. The board members stared at him with undisguised contempt. He opened his mouth, but no words materialized. His silver tongue failed him completely. The chief executive officer did not ask for further explanations. He called corporate security. 2 uniformed guards entered the boardroom. The executive board immediately suspended Connor without pay, pending a full forensic embezzlement audit. They confiscated his company phone and his laptop. They demanded his access badge. The security guards escorted him out of the building. He carried his personal belongings in a small cardboard box. He walked past his former subordinates. They watched him in stunned silence. His reputation evaporated in the span of a single afternoon. Connor stood on the concrete sidewalk outside his former corporate headquarters. His bank accounts were already frozen by the federal insurance investigation. His 6-figure salary was officially terminated. His reputation in the logistics industry was destroyed permanently. He had no liquid capital to hire a legitimate defense attorney to navigate the impending corporate lawsuit. Standard law firms required massive upfront retainers to handle federal embezzlement cases. He was completely cut off from the traditional financial ecosystem. The panic morphed into pure survival instinct. He needed cash to prevent total incarceration. He walked away from the glass tower and pulled a cheap prepaid phone from his pocket. He turned his back on the legitimate world and initiated contact with a network of high-interest predatory lenders operating entirely in the shadows. Stripped of his income and facing absolute ruin, he willingly stepped into a deeper trap to finance his legal defense. The skyline of the city reflected perfectly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Connor and Monica's residence. They occupied a 4,000-square-foot penthouse in the financial district. The unit featured private elevator access and a rooftop terrace with a detached guest suite. They used this address to project an image of generational wealth and untouchable corporate success. They hosted extravagant cocktail parties and bragged about their real estate acumen. They never mentioned that they did not own a single square inch of the property. The lease was held by a faceless property management limited liability company. They paid their exorbitant monthly rent to a corporate Dropbox. They had no idea I was the sole proprietor and managing director of that shell corporation. I bought the penthouse through the proxy entity 5 years ago to diversify my commercial portfolio. When Connor requested help finding a luxury apartment, I directed him to the management company under the guise of utilizing a business connection. He signed an airtight lease agreement binding him to strict compliance clauses. Connor treated the property with the same arrogance he applied to his career. He and Monica decided the massive rent was cutting too deeply into their lifestyle budget. They bypassed the management company entirely and initiated an illegal subletting operation. They rented out the rooftop guest suite to wealthy international students for cash. They funneled the undeclared income directly into Monica's failing boutique accounts to create the illusion of retail profit. They blatantly violated the primary occupancy clause of their lease. I knew about the sublet for 8 months. Declan had monitored the guest suite traffic and compiled a comprehensive dossier of the unauthorized tenants. He documented the cash transfers and photographed the secondary occupants using their access keys. I filed the evidence away. I waited for the exact moment when deploying it would cause maximum structural damage to their lives. That moment arrived on a Tuesday morning. With Connor suspended from his corporate position and his banking assets frozen by the federal insurance investigation, his automated rent payment failed to clear. The management company portal triggered an immediate insufficient funds alert. Standard landlord protocols dictate issuing a 30-day grace period for a bounced check. I bypassed the standard grace period entirely. I instructed the property management attorneys to execute an immediate lease termination protocol based on the severity of the dual breach. Connor had failed to pay the rent and had operated an illegal commercial sublet on the premises. The combination of these two factors in our specific municipal jurisdiction allowed for an accelerated 3-day notice to quit. The legal snare I had patiently maintained for 8 months snapped shut. I did not send a standard courier to deliver the eviction notice. I hired a specialized private security firm. These contractors handled high-risk corporate asset retrievals and hostile executive terminations. I dispatched a team of 4 operatives to the penthouse. They wore tailored black suits and carried the legal documentation in locked waterproof portfolios. They bypassed the building concierge by presenting the primary ownership credentials of my shell corporation. They rode the private elevator directly to the penthouse floor. They stepped into the private foyer and knocked firmly on the double doors. Monica answered the door wearing a silk robe holding a cup of espresso. She expected a delivery driver or a building maintenance worker. She was entirely unprepared for a team of grim security contractors standing on her threshold. The lead operative stated his name and his firm. He informed her that the property management company was executing an immediate lease termination due to severe contractual violations. He handed her the formal 3-day notice to quit and a secondary document demanding the immediate vacating of the premises due to the illegal sublet operation. Monica stared at the papers. Her initial confusion rapidly mutated into explosive aristocratic rage. She threw the documents back at the operative. She screamed that she was the wife of a powerful executive and that they had no right to harass her in her own home. She attempted to slam the heavy oak door in their faces. The lead operative calmly placed his boot against the threshold, preventing the door from closing. Monica retreated into the penthouse and grabbed her smartphone. She dialed emergency services. She hysterically reported a home invasion and demanded an immediate police response. She believed her manufactured status would command the authorities to remove the inconvenience from her doorstep. She stood behind the marble kitchen island, screaming threats at the security team remaining in the foyer. The operatives did not engage. They stood with their hands clasped behind their backs, waiting for the authorities to arrive. They understood the legal gravity of their position. 2 uniformed police officers arrived via the private elevator within 10 minutes. They entered the penthouse with their hands resting on their utility belts, assessing the scene for a violent intrusion. Monica rushed toward them. She pointed at the security contractors and demanded their immediate arrest. She claimed they were trespassing and threatening her physical safety. The lead security operative stepped forward calmly. He did not raise his voice. He handed the senior police officer the locked waterproof portfolio. He presented the chain of title proving my limited liability company owned the unit. He produced the bounced rent check notification. He submitted Declan's extensive photographic evidence of the illegal rooftop sublet. Finally, he presented the certified eviction notice stamped by the county judge that morning. The senior officer reviewed the documentation methodically. He looked at the undeniable proof of the illegal sublet and the irrefutable ownership records. The burden of proof shifted instantly. The police officers realized they were not responding to a home invasion. They were responding to a legal eviction of a hostile tenant. The senior officer turned his back on the security team and faced Monica. He informed her that the paperwork was entirely legitimate and legally binding. He stated that the illegal subletting operation voided her tenant protections under local municipal ordinances. He ordered her to cease her hostilities immediately and comply with the property management directives. He warned her that any further obstruction of the legal process would result in her immediate arrest for trespassing and disturbing the peace. The aristocratic facade Monica had weaponized for years shattered against the cold reality of law enforcement. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She looked frantically around her immaculate kitchen, seeking an escape route that did not exist. Connor was entirely unreachable, busy dealing with the fallout of his destroyed corporate career and his desperate search for predatory loans. She was completely isolated. The lead security operative informed the police that a bonded moving crew was waiting in the service elevator to assist the tenant with her immediate departure. The officers agreed to remain on site to ensure a peaceful transition of the property back to the rightful owners. The private elevator doors chimed open. A team of 8 professional movers entered the penthouse carrying heavy-duty corrugated boxes and industrial packing tape. They moved with terrifying efficiency. They bypassed Monica entirely and began dismantling the visual markers of her fake empire. They emptied the custom walk-in closets. They pulled designer dresses, tailored suits, and imported shoes from their wooden hangers and dropped them into the cardboard containers. They stripped the expensive cosmetics and imported perfumes from the marble bathroom counters. They packed her life into brown boxes with ruthless clinical speed. Monica was forced out of the penthouse by the security operatives. She rode the elevator down to the ground floor in complete silence, accompanied by the 2 police officers. She was escorted out the glass lobby doors and directed to stand on the concrete sidewalk. The moving crew utilized the service elevator to transport her belongings down to the street level. They began stacking the heavy cardboard boxes on the curb, directly next to a rusted municipal trash can. Monica stood on the pavement, shivering in the afternoon wind. She watched the moving crew stack 20 boxes of her luxury wardrobe onto the dirty concrete. Pedestrians walked past her, glancing at the mountain of displaced wealth with casual curiosity. The pristine illusion of her high society lifestyle vanished entirely. She was no longer a wealthy socialite hosting rooftop parties. She was a delinquent tenant, standing on the street, guarding a pile of cardboard boxes, waiting for a husband who had no money and no power left to save her. I watched the entire operation conclude through the live feed transmitted by the security team. The parasitic drain on my property was officially neutralized. Monica demanded a parley within 48 hours of her curbside displacement. She refused to communicate through my legal counsel. She insisted on a face-to-face negotiation at a neutral location. I selected a private conference room at a downtown business club where my membership guaranteed absolute discretion. I arrived 30 minutes early. I placed a digital audio recorder in the center of the polished oak table. I activated the device. I sat in the high-backed leather chair facing the heavy double doors and waited. Monica arrived exactly on time. She wore a tailored black trench coat and large sunglasses, attempting to project an aura of untouchable glamour. The illusion failed entirely. Her posture was rigid with suppressed panic. Her hands gripped a designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. She sat across from me without offering a greeting. She removed her sunglasses and glared at me with pure venom. The eviction had stripped away her aristocratic camouflage. She was operating on pure survival instinct. She did not waste time with pleasantries or apologies. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small square of glossy thermal paper. She slid it across the polished wood. The paper came to rest directly in front of my hands. It was a standard medical sonogram. The grainy black and white image displayed the unmistakable curvature of a developing fetus. Monica leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. She announced her pregnancy with a tone of victorious defiance. She claimed she was exactly 12 weeks along with my first biological grandchild. She let the statement hang in the quiet room, expecting to witness a profound emotional collapse. She assumed my paternal instincts would override my tactical discipline. She believed the prospect of a family legacy would blind me to her criminal nature. She immediately pivoted from the emotional revelation to the financial extortion. She laid out her demands with the precision of a hostile corporate takeover. She required the immediate establishment of an irrevocable trust fund for the unborn child. The principal amount she demanded was $2 million. She stipulated that she must be named the sole managing trustee until the child reached the age of 25. This structure would grant her unrestricted access to the trust dividends to cover her housing, medical, and lifestyle expenses. She framed this extortion as a generous compromise. She promised that if I funded the trust within 7 business days, she and Connor would permanently relocate to another state. They would cease all legal hostilities. They would leave Diane and me in absolute peace. If I refused, she threatened to leverage the child against us in the court of public opinion. She promised a media campaign detailing how a billionaire grandfather abandoned his pregnant daughter-in-law on the street. I looked down at the sonogram. I did not touch the paper. I analyzed the image with the same clinical detachment I apply to a stress test on a steel beam. I looked up at Monica. I did not express anger or disbelief. I nodded slowly. I told her that a $2 million trust was a logical request to secure a child's future. I commended her foresight in seeking a permanent financial guarantee. I watched the tension drain from her shoulders. Her posture relaxed into arrogant triumph. She believed she had found the structural flaw in my defenses. She thought she had successfully manipulated a lonely old man desperate for a grandchild. I opened my leather portfolio. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal stationery. I placed it next to the sonogram. I explained that my corporate holding company possessed strict bylaws regarding generational wealth transfers. I told her that Gable, my lead attorney, required standard verification protocols before authorizing the release of a $2 million principal. I requested a routine, non-invasive prenatal DNA test to establish definitive paternity. I presented it as a minor administrative hurdle. I offered to have my private medical concierge handle the blood draw at her convenience within the hour. I assured her the process carried zero physical risk to the pregnancy. The trap closed with an audible snap. Monica stared at the legal document. The arrogant triumph vanished from her face, replaced by raw, unfiltered terror. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. She violently rejected the proposal. She claimed the stress of a genetic test would endanger the baby. She cited fabricated medical articles claiming blood draws caused unnecessary trauma to expectant mothers. Her voice rose in pitch as she scrambled to build a defensive perimeter. She accused me of paranoia and cruelty. She demanded I trust her word and fund the account immediately to prove my commitment to the family bloodline. She was drowning in her own lies and thrashing wildly for a lifeline. I allowed her to exhaust her fabricated medical excuses. I waited for her to run out of breath. I reached back into my portfolio. I retrieved a second document. This paper was not printed on legal stationery. It was a digital printout bearing the official watermark of a private women's health clinic located 3 counties away. Declan is not restricted by standard privacy firewalls. When Monica demanded this meeting, Declan immediately initiated a forensic digital sweep of her entire medical history. He bypassed the clinic's security servers and extracted her surgical records. He delivered the unredacted file to my encrypted inbox 3 hours before I arrived at the club. I slid the surgical report across the table. I placed it deliberately over the fake sonogram. The document detailed a voluntary elective procedure performed exactly 5 years ago. It was a comprehensive tubal ligation. The surgical notes confirmed the procedure was permanent and irreversible. Monica had sterilized herself half a decade before she even met my son. She had actively deceived Connor regarding her ability to conceive to secure his proposal. The sonogram she purchased online was nothing more than a prop in a fraudulent extortion scheme. Monica looked down at her own medical records. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray. She opened her mouth to speak, but her vocal cords paralyzed. She realized the absolute totality of her defeat. I did not raise my voice. I leaned forward and delivered my final assessment. I informed her that attempting to extort $2 million through fabricated medical claims constituted a severe federal felony. I reached out and tapped the digital audio recorder sitting in the center of the table. The red light blinked steadily. I told her that every threat, every demand, and every lie she uttered over the last 20 minutes was permanently documented. I stood up from my leather chair. I gathered my legal portfolio. I left the fake sonogram and her stolen surgical records resting on the mahogany wood. I informed Monica that the audio file was already syncing to a secure cloud server monitored by my legal counsel. Gable was preparing the formal extortion charges to hand over to the district attorney. I told her she had exhausted her final opportunity for a peaceful exit. I turned my back on her and walked toward the heavy double doors. I did not look back. I left her sitting alone in the silent conference room, staring at the undeniable proof of her own destruction. The illusion of her control was completely eradicated. She was now trapped in a rapidly accelerating legal nightmare with absolutely no avenue for escape. Connor drove the matte black German sports coupe onto the immaculate concrete lot of the premier luxury automotive exchange in the metropolitan area. Monica followed closely behind him, navigating the pearl-white Italian convertible. These 2 vehicles were the ultimate outward symbols of his fabricated executive supremacy. He had leased them using highly aggressive financing structures based entirely on his anticipated corporate bonuses. Now those bonuses were permanently gone. His corporate salary was suspended indefinitely. The downtown penthouse was lost to the eviction. The vehicles represented his final remaining reserve of accessible capital. He parked aggressively across 2 reserved customer spaces near the main entrance. He intended to project the image of a wealthy, affluent collector liquidating surplus toys for a quick capital reallocation. He stepped out of the low-slung coupe and adjusted his designer suit jacket. The expensive fabric hung slightly loose on his frame after the intense psychological stress of the past few weeks. He walked into the climate-controlled showroom, demanding immediate attention from the general manager. He slapped the heavy metallic key fobs onto the polished glass reception desk. He demanded an expedited cash offer for the pair of vehicles. He cited a sudden international corporate relocation as his motivation for the sudden sale. The general manager was a seasoned veteran of high-end automotive liquidations. He recognized the distinct scent of financial desperation immediately. Wealthy clients rarely demanded expedited cash buyouts. They utilized patient consignment channels. The manager maintained a polite professional facade. He offered Connor a cup of artisan espresso and directed him to a leather sofa in the private client lounge. He promised a rapid evaluation and instructed his lead appraiser to inspect the vehicles. Connor sat on the sofa checking his heavy platinum watch every 30 seconds. He calculated the minimum acceptable offer in his head. He needed at least $80,000 in liquid cash to secure a new luxury rental property and to retain a criminal defense attorney for his impending corporate embezzlement audit. He watched through the soundproof glass partition as the appraiser walked around the vehicles, checking the tire tread and the pristine custom paint finishes. The general manager returned to his primary desk and logged into the Federal Registry database. He typed the vehicle identification numbers into the secure terminal to verify the clean titles Connor claimed to possess. The system processed the request. A bright red alert flashed across the high-resolution monitor. The Federal Registry indicated massive hard liens actively placed against both vehicles. The titles were entirely locked. The manager frowned and clicked the detailed lien report. The primary financier listed was not the original international banking conglomerate Connor had initially utilized. The active debt holder was a newly registered commercial holding company. 5 months ago, Connor missed a single payment on both vehicles. He assumed the standard banking grace periods applied. He ignored the automated warning notices, assuming his executive status granted him infinite administrative leeway. I did not ignore those notices. I monitored his financial vulnerabilities continuously through Declan's surveillance network. I utilized a proxy financial firm to approach the original international automotive lender. I purchased both loans in their entirety, paying the outstanding principal in cash. I became the sole legal owner of my son's vehicular debt. I rewrote the internal contract stipulations, utilizing the default clauses Connor had foolishly signed. The exact moment Connor lost his corporate salary and missed his current monthly payment, I triggered the immediate asset recovery protocol. I authorized a maximum priority repossession order. I bypassed the standard warning letters and deployed licensed recovery agents directly to the GPS coordinates transmitting from his cars. The general manager printed the federal lien report and walked into the client lounge. He did not offer Connor the physical paperwork. He placed it face down on the glass table. He informed Connor that the dealership could not facilitate the purchase under any circumstances. He stated plainly that neither vehicle possessed a clean transportable title. Connor jumped to his feet. He raised his voice and accused the manager of attempting a lowball negotiation tactic. He aggressively insisted his financing was entirely manageable and demanded the manager call his original bank to verify the excellent standing of the accounts. The manager shook his head. He informed Connor that the original bank no longer held the paper. He turned the printed report over and pointed to the active repossession flags. Connor stared at the bold red text. His arrogant bluster evaporated instantly. He recognized the name of the holding company listed on the lien. It was the exact same proxy entity that had just purchased Monica's catastrophic offshore margin debt. He realized the perimeter had collapsed completely. He reached for the key fobs resting on the table, attempting to abort the sale and flee the lot. He was too late. The heavy rumble of diesel engines echoed through the showroom glass. 2 massive industrial tow trucks pulled into the pristine luxury lot. The drivers did not hesitate or wait for permission. They possessed active federal recovery orders equipped with real-time tracking data provided by the vehicle's internal navigation systems. They positioned their heavy rigs directly in front of the sports cars. Connor ran out of the showroom waving his arms frantically. He shouted at the recovery agents, ordering them to stop. He threatened them with severe legal retaliation and civil lawsuits. The drivers ignored his performative outrage completely. They operate in a high-conflict industry and recognize powerless threats instantly. They attached the heavy steel towing hitches to the reinforced transport points on the undercarriages. The hydraulic winches whined loudly. The front wheels of the matte black coupe and the pearl-white convertible lifted off the concrete simultaneously. Monica ran out of the passenger side of the convertible, clutching her designer handbag. She screamed as the vehicles were hoisted into the air. The dealership staff and several wealthy clients gathered near the showroom windows, watching the spectacular public humiliation unfold. Connor attempted to physically block the lead tow truck by stepping into its path. The driver calmly locked the cabin doors and blasted the heavy air horn. The deafening sound forced Connor to stumble backward onto the pavement. The trucks engaged their gears and pulled out of the lot, merging seamlessly into the afternoon traffic. Connor and Monica stood alone on the expansive concrete driveway. They had arrived in $500,000 of engineered German and Italian steel. They were now stranded miles from the city center without a single mode of transportation. Monica began to sob uncontrollably. The physical manifestation of their wealth was being dragged away down the interstate. Connor stared at the empty parking spaces. The sheer mechanical efficiency of the operation left him paralyzed. He turned to the general manager standing near the glass doors and demanded the use of a dealership courtesy vehicle. The manager silently turned around and walked back into the showroom, locking the heavy doors behind him. He wanted absolutely zero association with a man experiencing an active asset seizure. Connor reached into his pocket to order a premium rideshare service. He needed to escape the judging eyes of the dealership clientele. He pulled out his smartphone and opened the transportation application. The screen displayed a rapid payment error. The associated credit card was declined. Connor switched to his primary banking application to verify his available balances. The interface loaded with agonizing slowness. A stark automated alert popped up on the bright screen. The federal insurance investigation into his stolen medical premiums had reached its final administrative phase. The bank had officially finalized the total closure of his frozen joint accounts. The institution cited severe violations of their terms of service regarding suspected fraudulent activity. Every single cent of his remaining capital was locked indefinitely within a federal holding account pending a criminal indictment. He could not buy a cup of coffee. He could not pay for a taxi ride home. He was officially and completely cut off from the traditional financial system. He stood on the hot concrete, gripping the useless piece of technology. The sterile safety of corporate banking was gone. His desperate need for immediate liquid cash left him with only one remaining option. He had to cross the line into the unregulated territory of illicit syndicate lending. He looked at Monica crying on the curb and initiated his descent into the underground market. Monica retreated into the unregulated digital ecosystem to launch a desperate asymmetrical offensive. She rented a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city and positioned a harsh ring light in the corner to manufacture the perfect aesthetic of sudden, agonizing poverty. She recorded a highly produced 10-minute video and broadcast it across every major social media platform simultaneously. She stared directly into the camera lens with perfectly mascaraed eyes brimming with engineered tears. She painted a horrifying theatrical portrait of a tyrannical billionaire patriarch determined to crush his own bloodline. She claimed I had illegally seized their luxury penthouse through corrupt corporate loopholes and thrown a vulnerable, expectant mother onto the freezing concrete sidewalk without a single dollar to her name. She weaponized her fabricated 3-month pregnancy to extract maximum sympathy from an unsuspecting global audience. She described me as a ruthless monster who hoarded vast commercial wealth while gleefully subjecting his own unborn grandchild to imminent starvation and homelessness. She begged the internet for immediate financial donations and demanded public justice against my supposed reign of terror. The engagement algorithms rewarded her performative suffering instantly. The video achieved viral velocity within hours of upload, accumulating hundreds of thousands of views and shares across multiple continents. A massive anonymous digital mob mobilized on her behalf, fueled by righteous indignation and severely misplaced empathy. They utilized open-source intelligence tools to hunt down the public profiles of my structural engineering firm and my proxy commercial holding companies. They flooded my professional network with thousands of hateful comments and coordinated negative reviews designed to destroy my corporate credibility. The digital harassment rapidly spilled over into the physical world when anonymous users began calling the central switchboards of my primary business associates, demanding they sever all ties with my logistics operations. My corporate partners forwarded the threatening voicemails and unhinged emails to my private inbox, expressing deep concern over the rapidly deteriorating public relations situation. Monica believed the sheer volume of internet outrage would force me into a rapid financial settlement to salvage my professional reputation. She thought she had successfully weaponized the modern attention economy to circumvent my impenetrable legal defenses. She severely miscalculated my threshold for public pressure. I did not issue a desperate press release or hire an expensive crisis management firm to draft a weak, placating apology. I did not engage in a frantic digital shouting match or attempt to defend my character against a faceless mob of aggressive strangers. I instructed my executive staff to completely ignore the ringing phones and the flooded email servers. I allowed Monica to dominate the news cycle for 48 unobstructed hours. I gave her enough time to permanently anchor her false narrative into the public consciousness. I wanted her to climb to the absolute highest pedestal of professional victimhood before I removed the foundation entirely. I authorized Declan to prepare a targeted tactical countermeasure. We bypassed the traditional media outlets and utilized the exact same digital channels Monica had exploited. We did not write a single word of defensive commentary or emotional opinion. We simply uploaded 3 distinct data files to a dedicated anonymous server and distributed the link directly to the highest-profile commentators who had aggressively amplified her original video. The first file was the raw, unedited security footage captured in my foyer on the afternoon of the assault. The high-definition camera mounted above the crystal chandelier provided a crystal-clear overhead view of the entire physical altercation. The video began by showing Diane walking slowly toward the front door, carrying a small cardboard box of winter clothing. The audio track captured the mundane, quiet sounds of her footsteps on the hardwood floor. The peaceful scene shattered violently when Monica burst through the front entrance. The microphone picked up the exact vicious tone of her voice as she demanded immediate access to the family safe. The undeniable truth of her physical aggression was broadcast in pristine resolution. The viewers watched Monica deliberately step forward and shove a frail older woman backward with maximum violent force. The sickening crack of Diane striking the heavy mahogany credenza echoed loudly through the digital file. The footage captured Monica standing over her fallen mother-in-law, offering absolutely no medical assistance before turning and fleeing the scene of her crime. The visual evidence instantly obliterated the fragile, helpless persona she had constructed in her motel room broadcast. The second file systematically dismantled the illusion of their desperate, unearned poverty. Declan uploaded the pristine audio recording of the phone call Connor placed to the insurance brokerage firm. The digital metadata stamped the exact date and time, proving the call occurred weeks before any of the current financial disasters struck their household. The online mob listened to the crisp, unbothered voice of my son, casually navigating the automated telephone menus. They heard him explicitly instruct the broker to downgrade his mother's premium comprehensive medical coverage to the absolute cheapest, high-deductible catastrophe plan available on the market. They listened in stunned silence as he explicitly authorized the diversion of the refunded premium surplus directly into his personal checking account. The undeniable audio evidence exposed the exact mechanical process he utilized to steal the funds meant for his mother's life-saving emergency surgery. The recording demonstrated a level of calculated predatory greed that completely repulsed the very audience Monica had attempted to manipulate. The third and final file represented the absolute eradication of her entire extortion campaign. We uploaded a redacted copy of her verified surgical records, retrieved directly from the private women's health clinic. We obscured her sensitive personal identification numbers, but left her full legal name and the date of the procedure clearly visible for public consumption. The clinical documentation outlined the elective tubal ligation she underwent half a decade prior. The surgical notes explicitly confirmed the permanent and irreversible nature of the biological sterilization. We paired this verified medical document with the digital audio file captured in the downtown business club conference room. The public listened to Monica arrogantly demand a $2 million trust fund for a child she was biologically incapable of conceiving. They heard her weaponize a fake pregnancy to extort a man she had just publicly accused of horrific abuse. The chronological presentation of these three files dismantled her entire narrative structure with devastating forensic precision. The public narrative inverted with terrifying, unstoppable velocity. The same online algorithms that had catapulted her fraudulent video to viral status now propelled the raw, undeniable evidence of her crimes across the globe. The anonymous internet mob that had harassed my business associates suddenly recognized they had been aggressively manipulated by a violent extortionist. They redirected their collective fury entirely onto Monica and Connor. Her social media channels were instantly flooded with tens of thousands of angry messages, exposing her lies and demanding immediate accountability for the brutal assault on Diane. The digital backlash was absolute and unrelenting. The prominent social commentators who had initially championed her cause immediately deleted their supportive posts and published lengthy, angry retractions condemning her actions. Her fraudulent crowdfunding campaigns were flagged for deceptive criminal practices and permanently frozen by the host platforms. The money she had managed to collect was forcibly refunded to the original donors. Her professional reputation in the local retail industry was vaporized in a single brutal afternoon. The high-end luxury boutiques she had previously patronized placed her on permanent security ban lists. No legitimate commercial enterprise would associate their brand with a documented fraudster caught on camera assaulting an elderly woman. The digital strike rendered her completely unemployable and totally isolated from the high society she so desperately craved. She was permanently buried under the crushing, inescapable weight of her own documented truth. Connor sat on the sagging mattress of a roadside motel located miles from the gleaming financial district he once commanded. The stagnant air smelled of stale tobacco and industrial bleach. His complete isolation from traditional banking institutions left him with a single catastrophic objective. He intended to initiate a massive civil lawsuit against me to reclaim his lost corporate prestige and financial comfort. Heavy litigation required an immediate injection of capital. Standard legal retainers demanded liquid cash he no longer possessed. He bypassed commercial lenders entirely and reached out to a shadowy network of private financiers operating far outside municipal regulations. These individuals provided undocumented bridge loans to desperate clients at exorbitant interest rates. They required tangible physical collateral to secure their extremely high-risk investments. Connor arranged a discreet meeting at a desolate industrial park on the edge of the county limits. He met with a lone facilitator operating out of a windowless concrete office that smelled of diesel fuel and damp cement. The facilitator demanded absolute proof of collateral before releasing any currency. Connor reached into his leather briefcase and produced the fraudulent quitclaim deed. He presented the forged document transferring total ownership of my fortified multi-million-dollar estate directly into his name. He lied to the dangerous men with the practiced ease of a career corporate executive. He claimed the sprawling property was a recent family inheritance temporarily tied up in minor bureaucratic probate delays. He assured the skeptical facilitator that the estate held zero existing mortgages and represented pure, accessible equity. The syndicate appraiser verified the address and confirmed the massive market value of the land through public satellite imagery. They did not utilize standard municipal verification protocols or file official county liens. They relied entirely on the implied physical threat of extreme violence to ensure compliance and timely repayment. The facilitator approved the transaction based entirely on the perceived value of the forged deed. He pushed a heavy canvas duffel bag across the scarred metal desk. The bag contained exactly $100,000 in banded unmarked currency. Connor signed a heavily penalized promissory note without reading the specific clauses. He agreed to an illegal compounding interest rate structure designed to trap the borrower indefinitely. He walked out of the industrial park, clutching the heavy duffel bag, believing he had finally secured the ultimate resources to destroy me. He completely underestimated the reach of my surveillance network. Declan monitors the digital communications of regional illicit networks precisely for this type of desperate anomaly. He maintains persistent deep cover access to the encrypted digital ledgers used by these underground financiers to track their outstanding markers. He intercepted the digital shadow associated with Connor within 3 hours of the physical transaction. He analyzed the collateral registry and identified the forged quitclaim deed immediately. He compiled the precise details of the illicit loan and transmitted the raw data directly to my secure desktop terminal. I reviewed the predatory terms of the promissory note with intense satisfaction. Connor had willingly tied his physical safety to a useless document that held absolutely no legal weight. The violent syndicate genuinely believed they held a shadow lien against my fortified estate. I decided to weaponize this critical misunderstanding to expedite his total collapse. I instructed Declan to contact the primary broker of the lending syndicate through an untraceable encrypted proxy channel. We did not alert local law enforcement or the federal authorities. We initiated a hostile financial takeover of the illicit debt. Declan negotiated the immediate purchase of the promissory note, utilizing layered and untraceable cryptocurrency transfers. I authorized a massive premium payment of $150,000 to acquire the debt outright. The underground syndicate broker gladly accepted the 50% profit margin to wash his hands of the transaction entirely. The encrypted digital ledgers updated silently. I became the absolute owner of my son's underground financial markers. I controlled the unforgiving terms of his repayment and the brutal mechanisms of collection. The syndicate enforcers now effectively operated under my direct financial command. I instructed Declan to significantly alter the collection timeline. We bypassed the standard 30-day repayment window stipulated in the original illicit agreement. We triggered an immediate acceleration clause buried deep within the fine print of the predatory promissory note. I ordered the hired collection operatives to initiate direct contact and demand full immediate restitution. Connor returned to his cheap motel room carrying the heavy canvas duffel bag. He dumped the banded currency onto the stained floral bedspread and began dividing the cash to retain a ruthless civil litigation firm. He planned his aggressive legal strategy completely oblivious to the shifting tectonic plates beneath his feet. The heavy wooden door of his motel room shuddered under a massive physical blow. The door frame splintered. 2 large men stepped into the cramped space before Connor could even react. They wore heavy leather jackets and moved with terrifying, predatory efficiency. They were veteran collection enforcers contracted by the syndicate broker. They did not introduce themselves or offer polite pleasantries. The taller man kicked the broken door shut and engaged the bent deadbolt. The second man stepped toward the bed and casually swept the neat stacks of currency back into the canvas duffel bag. Connor loudly protested the intrusion and aggressively demanded they leave his property. The enforcers ignored his pathetic corporate vocabulary entirely. The taller man stepped forward and pushed Connor violently against the peeling wallpaper. The enforcer informed Connor that the underlying financial arrangements of his loan had shifted dramatically. He stated that the silent backer of the syndicate had initiated an immediate and non-negotiable recall of the principal amount. He laid out the new terms of physical survival. Connor owed the original $100,000 plus an additional $50,000 in accelerated penalty interest. The enforcer gave him exactly 48 hours to deliver the entire sum in untraceable cash. Connor panicked and pointed a trembling finger at the forged quitclaim deed resting on the flimsy laminate nightstand. He shouted that the syndicate held a valuable multi-million-dollar property as secure collateral and that the debt was fully covered. The taller enforcer laughed with bone-chilling cruelty. He informed Connor that their appraisers had finally run a deep forensic title search on the estate. They discovered the signature was missing, and the deed was a completely worthless forgery. They knew Connor had intentionally defrauded a highly violent criminal enterprise. The enforcers promised catastrophic physical consequences if the 48-hour deadline passed without a full cash payment. They walked out of the ruined motel room, taking the duffel bag containing the original loan capital with them. They left Connor pinned against the wall with absolutely nothing. He slowly slid down to the stained carpet. The ambient noise of the passing highway traffic outside faded into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. The gravity of his situation crushed his chest like a concrete block. The forged deed had transformed from a tactical weapon into an absolute death sentence. He had no corporate salary and no banking access. His luxury vehicles were seized, and the illicit loan capital was confiscated. He owed $150,000 to ruthless men who did not recognize civil law or corporate boundaries. He was trapped perfectly between an impending federal embezzlement indictment and immediate physical destruction at the hands of underground enforcers. The intense psychological pressure finally shattered the fragile remnants of his inflated executive ego. His breathing became erratic and shallow as a severe panic attack consumed his nervous system. He clawed at the cheap carpet, entirely consumed by blind animal terror. His mind fractured under the horrifying realization that every manipulative scheme he engineered had only built a deeper cell for his own destruction. He sat alone in the dark motel room, completely paralyzed by the inescapable consequences of his own boundless greed. The notification arrived via certified mail on a crisp Tuesday morning. Connor had exhausted his corporate avenues and failed spectacularly in the criminal underworld. His final desperate maneuver was an assault on my legal autonomy. I sat at my heavy oak desk and read the emergency petition filed in the county family court. My son was requesting immediate and total legal guardianship over my person and my entire estate. He claimed my recent actions were the result of severe paranoid schizophrenia. He alleged that I was systematically destroying my own life and tearing our family apart due to profound mental deterioration. He begged the court to grant him full control of my financial assets to protect me from my own supposed delusions. It was a staggering display of audacity. He was utilizing the judicial system to execute the theft he could not manage with forged paperwork or predatory lenders. I did not feel fear as I read his fabricated allegations. I felt a cold and absolute resolve to crush this final rebellion. I called Gable. My lead attorney did not express surprise. He simply asked for the date of the hearing and promised to prepare a definitive counteroffensive. The county courthouse was a massive structure of limestone and polished granite. I walked into the assigned courtroom wearing a dark tailored suit. Gable walked beside me carrying a thick leather briefcase. Diane remained at home under the protection of private security. I would not allow her to witness the final destruction of our son. Connor and Monica were already seated at the plaintiff table. They wore conservative clothing selected specifically to project an image of responsible, concerned family members. Monica held a crumpled tissue and adopted an expression of deep, manufactured sorrow. The courtroom gallery was packed with spectators and legal clerks anticipating a high-profile family dispute. The judge entered and took her seat at the high bench. She was a stern woman with decades of experience handling elder law and guardianship disputes. She called the court to order and invited Connor to take the witness stand to justify his emergency petition. Connor walked to the stand and placed his hand on the holy book. He swore to tell the truth. He sat down and immediately launched into a rehearsed theatrical performance. He spoke softly and manufactured a tremor in his voice. He painted a tragic picture of a patriarch losing his grip on reality. He described my decision to sever his corporate contracts as irrational paranoia. He characterized the eviction from the penthouse as a manic episode. He completely omitted his own embezzlement and his illegal subletting operations. He claimed I was isolating myself and hoarding wealth due to severe undiagnosed schizophrenia. He looked directly at the judge and begged her to grant him control of the estate before I completely destroyed the legacy he claimed to hold dear. Monica wept quietly in the gallery, playing her part flawlessly. The performance was seamless. It was designed to manipulate the sympathies of the court and exploit the genuine vulnerabilities of elder law. The judge turned her attention to my table. She asked Gable if the defense wished to respond to the allegations of mental incompetence. Gable stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. He approached the center of the courtroom with supreme confidence. He did not raise his voice. He did not express outrage. He utilized the cold, hard weight of documented truth. He informed the judge that my defense would take less than 10 minutes. Gable opened his leather briefcase and produced 3 thick medical folders. He handed the first copy to the bailiff to deliver to the judge. He explained that anticipating this exact predatory maneuver, my legal team had proactively arranged for comprehensive cognitive evaluations. I had been examined by 3 independent board-certified psychiatrists over the past month. The folders contained their unanimous conclusions. The judge opened the files and read the highlighted summaries. The medical professionals certified that my mental faculties were flawless. They documented my exceptional cognitive function and explicitly ruled out any presence of schizophrenia, paranoia, or dementia. The foundation of Connor's entire petition crumbled instantly under the weight of irrefutable medical science. Connor gripped the edges of the witness stand. The color drained from his face as he watched the judge review the psychiatric evaluations. But Gable was not finished. He returned to his briefcase and retrieved a second stack of documents. He announced to the court that my recent actions were not the result of mental decline, but were instead necessary protective measures against severe financial exploitation. Gable submitted the raw forensic data Declan had pulled from the logistics firm. The documents detailed the exact offshore wallets and the fake vendor invoices Connor used to embezzle corporate funds. The judge flipped through the pages, her expression hardening with every passing second. Gable then submitted the audio transcript of Connor authorizing the downgrade of Diane's health insurance to steal her premium refunds. He concluded his presentation by handing the judge the blank friction ink deed and the security footage of Connor attempting to file the fraudulent transfer at the municipal clerk office. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The judge lowered the documents and stared directly at Connor. The manufactured sympathy he had cultivated evaporated entirely. She recognized him not as a concerned son, but as a predatory financial criminal attempting to manipulate her courtroom. She demanded Connor explain the forged insurance documents and the blank property deed. Connor stammered and looked toward his lawyer for assistance. His attorney remained seated, staring at the table, completely unwilling to defend the massive array of documented felonies. The judge struck her gavel against the wooden block with a sound like a gunshot. She did not merely reject the emergency guardianship petition. She dismissed it with extreme prejudice. She stated for the official record that the petition was a malicious and fraudulent abuse of the judicial system designed to facilitate elder exploitation. The judge did not stop at the dismissal. She addressed me directly and asked if I feared for my safety, given the extreme lengths my son was willing to go to steal my assets. Gable answered on my behalf, confirming that we were requesting immediate physical and legal protection. The judge drafted a permanent restraining order right from the bench. She ordered Connor and Monica to surrender any remaining keys or access codes to my properties. She mandated that they remain 500 yards away from Diane and me at all times. She warned them that any violation of the order would result in immediate incarceration without the possibility of bail. Connor sat paralyzed in the witness chair. The trap he had built for me had snapped shut on his own neck. The final blow came as the court was adjourning. The judge summoned the court reporter and the bailiff. She instructed them to gather every single piece of evidence Gable had submitted. The embezzlement records, the forged insurance authorizations, and the blank property deed were collected and placed into sealed evidence bags. She looked down at Connor with absolute disgust. She informed him that family court was not a shield for corporate theft and fraud. She announced that she was personally forwarding the entire sealed dossier directly to the office of the district attorney with a strong recommendation for immediate criminal prosecution regarding perjury and felony elder abuse. The gavel fell for the final time. The hearing was over. Connor was forced to stand and walk out of the courtroom beside his weeping wife. They had walked in expecting to seize a multi-million-dollar estate. They walked out with permanent restraining orders and a guaranteed federal criminal indictment waiting for them. The systematic dismantling of my ungrateful son was complete. He had nothing left to leverage and nowhere left to run. The forensic accountants at the logistics firm finalized their exhaustive reconstruction of the acquisitions department ledgers late Thursday evening. A specialized team of external digital auditors spent 72 continuous hours tearing through the financial wreckage my son left behind. The comprehensive report presented to the chief executive officer was a masterpiece of absolute corporate devastation. Connor had not simply inflated shipping volume metrics to secure a few departmental bonuses. He had orchestrated a systemic, sophisticated hemorrhaging of corporate capital. The forensic software traced a highly complex web of unauthorized wire transfers, originating directly from the primary vendor allowance accounts. The stolen capital was funneled through a series of anonymous international shell companies straight into Monaco offshore cryptocurrency portfolios. The auditors documented exactly $250,000 systematically siphoned away to cover the catastrophic margin calls generated by her collapsing digital investments. The sheer brazenness of the theft eliminated any possibility of a quiet internal severance or a negotiated repayment plan. The executive board convened an emergency session in the glass-walled conference room and voted unanimously to initiate immediate criminal proceedings. The corporate attorneys surrendered the entire unredacted forensic portfolio to the federal authorities. They formally pressed federal charges for wire fraud and severe corporate embezzlement. The bureaucratic machinery of the justice system engaged with terrifying speed. Warrants were drafted, reviewed by a federal magistrate, and signed for immediate execution. The documents were handed directly to the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Miles away from the sterile corporate environment, the air inside the roadside motel room was thick with the suffocating stench of stale tobacco and industrial bleach. Connor sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the cracked plaster ceiling. He was waiting for a miracle that would never arrive. His physical appearance mirrored his destroyed career. His designer suit was violently wrinkled, and his hands shook from severe sleep deprivation. Monica paced the length of the stained carpet. Her expensive leather shoes crunched over discarded fast food wrappers and dirty towels. She clutched the heavy canvas duffel bag containing the remaining cash from the illicit syndicate loan. She was actively transferring thick banded bundles of $100 bills into a smaller, discreet leather backpack. Her survival instinct was completely detached from any loyalty to her husband. She intended to abandon Connor to the underground enforcers and disappear across state lines before the situation deteriorated any further. The thin motel curtains were drawn tight against the morning sun, casting long, sickly shadows across the cramped space. Connor remained completely oblivious to her calculated escape preparations. His mind was entirely consumed by the impending threat of the collection operatives returning to extract their violent payment. He flinched at the sound of every passing commercial truck on the adjacent interstate highway. The rumble of approaching engines did not belong to the underground lending syndicate. A convoy of black sport utility vehicles pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the motel. Federal agents wearing heavy tactical vests emblazoned with yellow lettering moved with absolute synchronized precision. They established a secure perimeter around the single-story building in complete silence. Declan had anticipated the exact timing of the federal strike based on his continuous monitoring of the encrypted law enforcement dispatch frequencies. He anonymously transmitted the GPS coordinates of the motel and the target execution time directly to the assignment desks of 3 local news stations. 2 broadcast vans were already parked across the street, with high-definition cameras mounted on their elevated roofs, focusing telephoto lenses directly on room 114. The federal strike team stacked up against the flimsy motel door. A heavy steel battering ram shattered the locking mechanism in a single explosive strike. The door flew inward, tearing completely off its rusted hinges. Agents flooded the cramped space, shouting overlapping commands and illuminating the dark room with blinding weapon-mounted flashlights. Connor raised his hands instinctively, attempting to shield his eyes from the blinding glare. Two agents grabbed his arms, twisted him forcefully around, and slammed his chest against the peeling floral wallpaper. Cold steel handcuffs locked around his wrists with a sharp mechanical click. The agents dragged Connor backward out of the shattered doorway. The bright morning sunlight hit his face as he was marched roughly across the cracked pavement. The news cameras across the street captured every agonizing second of his public destruction. He blinked against the glare of the camera flashes. The arrogant executive vice president was reduced to a disheveled criminal suspect, wearing ruined clothes and struggling uselessly against the iron grip of federal law enforcement. The reporters documented his complete humiliation, broadcasting the live high-resolution feed to hundreds of thousands of local viewers. Inside the motel room, Monica recognized the catastrophic reality of the breach. She did not attempt to defend her husband or obey the shouted commands of the federal entry team. She grabbed the leather backpack stuffed with the stolen syndicate cash and sprinted toward the rear bathroom. She locked the hollow wooden door behind her and shoved the frosted glass window pane open. She scrambled through the narrow frame, tearing her silk blouse on the rusted metal latch. Her designer heels hit the muddy ground behind the motel structure. She believed she had successfully bypassed the primary tactical assault. She sprinted toward the rusted chain-link fence separating the property from an overgrown industrial drainage ditch. She never made it halfway across the damp grass. 3 federal perimeter agents stepped out from the cover of the overgrown brush with their weapons drawn and leveled directly at her chest. They ordered her to halt and drop the bag immediately. Monica froze mid-stride. She looked at the armed agents and the muddy terrain destroying her expensive footwear. The delusion of her superiority evaporated completely. She dropped the leather backpack containing the illicit funds into the mud. An agent stepped forward, grabbed her shoulder, and secured her wrists in heavy iron cuffs. She was escorted roughly around the perimeter of the building and forced to stand next to Connor near the armored transport vehicles. The local news crews zoomed in on her tear-streaked face, documenting the total collapse of her manufactured high-society persona. They were placed in separate vehicles and transported directly to the federal detention center downtown. The intake process stripped them of their remaining dignity. They were fingerprinted, photographed under harsh fluorescent lights, and locked in concrete holding cells to await their arraignment. The federal prosecutor, reviewing the overwhelming forensic evidence of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement, submitted a formal recommendation denying all requests for pretrial release. The presiding magistrate reviewed the flight risk generated by Monica, attempting to escape through a window with a bag of stolen cash. The judge agreed instantly, citing the massive financial damage and the clear evasion attempt. They were officially remanded to federal custody without the possibility of posting bail. The heavy steel doors of the maximum security facility slid shut, sealing them inside a nightmare entirely of their own creation. The precise architectural trap I designed to protect my family and eradicate their parasitic influence had finally and permanently clamped shut. Monica sat shivering inside the sterile confines of a federal interrogation room. The windowless concrete walls offered absolutely no comfort or escape from her catastrophic reality. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pale glow across her ruined designer clothing. The heavy steel door clicked open, and the lead prosecutor walked into the cramped space. She was a seasoned veteran of financial crime divisions who possessed absolutely zero tolerance for arrogant socialites. She dropped a massive stack of manila folders onto the scarred aluminum table. The loud thud echoed through the tiny room, like a judge bringing down a heavy wooden gavel. The prosecutor did not offer a polite greeting or a cup of water. She sat across from Monica and immediately outlined the exact parameters of the impending federal indictment. She listed the charges with terrifying clinical precision. The government was preparing to prosecute Monica for accessory to wire fraud, felony extortion, and severe corporate embezzlement. The prosecutor stated plainly that the sentencing guidelines for these combined offenses carried a mandatory minimum of 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Monica felt the last remaining fragments of her arrogant facade dissolve into pure animal terror. The reality of spending the next 2 decades wearing a canvas uniform completely paralyzed her nervous system. The prosecutor recognized the exact moment Monica broke. She leaned across the cold metal table and offered a highly calculated lifeline. She presented a localized immunity agreement. The terms were brutally simple and required total marital betrayal. The federal government needed absolute comprehensive documentation of the corporate theft to ensure a flawless conviction against the primary architect of the crime. The prosecutor promised to recommend a suspended sentence and supervised probation for Monica if she provided written sworn testimony detailing every single aspect of her husband's illegal operations. The offer demanded that she completely surrender Connor to the federal authorities without a single moment of hesitation. Monica did not ask for a private consultation with a defense attorney. She did not shed a single tear for the man she had married. She reached across the table and grabbed the blue ink pen with trembling, greedy fingers. She spent the next 3 uninterrupted hours drafting a spectacular document of complete betrayal. She filled page after page with meticulous descriptions of his criminal architecture. She detailed the exact timeline of the corporate embezzlement, outlining how he funneled the stolen logistics capital into her offshore cryptocurrency accounts. She deliberately painted herself as a terrified passive victim of his tyrannical financial control. She swore under penalty of perjury that Connor had engineered the forged property deed entirely on his own without her prior knowledge or consent. She explicitly blamed him for the cruel cancellation of the medical insurance premiums, claiming he forced her into compliance through severe economic manipulation and emotional abuse. She handed the completed affidavit back to the prosecutor with a desperate, hopeful smile. She had legally bound herself to a sworn confession that guaranteed her husband would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. She believed her ruthless betrayal had successfully purchased her freedom. She severely underestimated the relentless vigilance of my legal team. Gable had been monitoring the criminal proceedings with absolute predatory focus. He utilized his extensive network of judicial contacts to track the exact progress of the federal interrogations. The moment he received confirmation that Monica was attempting to secure an immunity deal, he initiated a devastating countermeasure. Gable scheduled an emergency private meeting with the lead district attorney managing the prosecution. He arrived at the federal building carrying a single encrypted flash drive. He did not engage in aggressive legal posturing or attempt to dictate the actions of the federal government. He simply delivered a supplemental dossier of unassailable digital evidence designed to ensure the immunity agreement was completely annihilated. Gable provided the unedited security footage captured at a local downtown pawn shop. The high-definition video clearly showed Monica attempting to fence stolen family heirlooms to fund her initial escape plan, proving she was actively liquidating stolen assets long before her arrest. He then handed over the pristine audio recording of the downtown club meeting. The digital file contained the exact moment Monica weaponized her fabricated pregnancy to extort a $2 million trust fund directly from my accounts. The federal courthouse was packed with spectators and local journalists when Monica arrived for her official arraignment. She walked into the grand mahogany courtroom, wearing a conservative tailored suit borrowed from a distant relative. She stood beside her appointed public defender, radiating a sickening aura of arrogant confidence. She fully expected to enter her cooperative plea, submit her sworn affidavit, and walk out of the heavy glass doors a completely free woman. Connor sat at the opposite defense table wearing a bright orange canvas jumpsuit and heavy iron shackles. He stared at his wife with a gaze of pure, venomous hatred. The prosecutor had provided his defense attorney with a copy of her written confession earlier that morning. He knew she had sold his entire life to save her own skin. The presiding judge entered the courtroom and took his seat at the elevated bench. He was a veteran jurist who despised defendants attempting to manipulate the justice system through calculated perjury. The judge picked up the proposed immunity agreement and stared down at Monica. He did not approve the motion. He brought the entire proceeding to a grinding halt. The judge announced for the official public record that federal immunity agreements required absolute candor and complete transparency from the cooperating witness. He stated that the court had just received supplemental evidence that directly contradicted the sworn statements Monica had provided in her handwritten affidavit. The judge pressed a button on his terminal and played the audio recording of the faked pregnancy extortion attempt over the courtroom speakers. The chilling sound of Monica demanding millions of dollars echoed loudly across the silent gallery. The judge then referenced the pawn shop surveillance footage and the previously documented physical assault on Diane. He looked directly at Monica and dismantled her entire defense strategy in a single devastating sentence. The judge declared that the new evidence definitively proved she was not a passive victim of financial coercion. The documentation established her as a highly proactive primary architect of violent extortion and severe elder abuse. She had intentionally committed perjury by attempting to minimize her criminal culpability in a sworn federal document. The judge raised his wooden gavel and struck the sound block with terrifying force. He officially voided the localized immunity agreement with extreme prejudice. Monica gasped and reached out to grip the edge of the defense table. Her legs threatened to collapse beneath her. Her public defender frantically attempted to withdraw the written confession and enter a standard plea of not guilty. The federal prosecutor immediately objected and shut the maneuver down completely. The prosecutor reminded the court that the signed affidavit remained a legally binding admission of guilt to the underlying charges, regardless of the voided immunity clause. Monica had voluntarily provided a comprehensive written confession detailing her direct involvement in the corporate embezzlement and the property fraud. The judge agreed with the prosecution and locked her into a binding guilty plea. He stripped away every single provision of leniency and probation. He announced that she was now facing the absolute maximum mandatory minimum prison sentence for her documented crimes. Her brilliant strategy of ultimate betrayal had yielded absolutely zero salvation. She had freely confessed to federal felonies under the delusion of safety and successfully trapped herself in a steel cage of her own making. The unholy alliance between husband and wife disintegrated completely into mutual, total destruction. They were dragged out of the courtroom by armed bailiffs through separate heavy wooden doors. They were bound for different maximum security penitentiaries, where they would spend the next 2 decades reflecting on the catastrophic consequences of their boundless greed. The heavy solid oak doors of the federal courthouse swung completely shut, firmly sealing the fate of the defendants. Connor sat at the scarred wooden table expecting a grand cinematic spectacle. The reality of the federal justice system offered absolutely zero theatrical comfort. The room was sterile and possessed the cold mechanical efficiency of an industrial slaughterhouse. The air inside the room felt heavy with the impending weight of absolute accountability. The lead prosecutor stood at the podium arranging a towering stack of manila folders with absolute precision. She did not raise her voice or attempt to manipulate the emotions of the jury. She treated the proceeding as a simple mathematical equation. She outlined the chronological architecture of the crimes with devastating clarity. She mapped out the exact moments the defendants chose predatory exploitation over honest labor. Connor watched the jury box desperately searching for a single sympathetic face. He found nothing but hardened expressions of deep civic disgust. The citizens sitting in judgment recognized the profound moral bankruptcy sitting at the defense table. The prosecution deployed their arsenal of irrefutable data with surgical accuracy. The courtroom technicians lowered large digital screens to display the forensic financial logs. The complex spreadsheets translated the sophisticated corporate embezzlement schemes into simple, undeniable arithmetic. The jury watched the stolen logistics funds flow through the network of shell companies directly into bleeding offshore cryptocurrency portfolios. The prosecutor then introduced the audio file captured by the private surveillance network. The pristine recording echoed loudly across the silent gallery. Everyone listened to Connor casually instruct the insurance broker to terminate the comprehensive medical coverage belonging to his own mother. They heard the greed in his voice as he explicitly demanded the premium surplus be routed into his personal checking account. The undeniable proof of his willingness to sacrifice physical survival for liquid cash destroyed any remaining fraction of reasonable doubt. The prosecutor did not stop there. She submitted the blank property deed and the security footage documenting the attempted real estate theft. The final devastating blow arrived when the government introduced the sworn affidavit. The prosecutor read the document aloud into the official record. The jury listened as the wife meticulously detailed the orchestration of the entire criminal enterprise. The written betrayal severed the final thread holding his fragile psyche together. The burden of defense fell upon an exhausted public defender. The appointed attorney recognized the absolute futility of fighting a mountain of verified forensic data and recorded confessions. He mounted no effective counteroffensive. He offered no alternate theories or character witnesses. He simply requested leniency based on a fabricated history of familial stress. The hollow arguments evaporated the moment they left his mouth. The judge inquired if the primary defendant wished to take the witness stand to testify in his own defense. Connor remained firmly bolted to his chair. The arrogant executive vice president, who once commanded boardrooms with effortless intimidation, had completely vanished. He was replaced by a hollow, terrified shell of a man paralyzed by the crushing weight of impending incarceration. He stared blankly at the polished mahogany table, refusing to meet the eyes of the jury or the judge. His absolute silence spoke louder than any crafted legal denial. He realized that every manipulative lie he possessed had been neutralized and weaponized against him. The prosecutor rested her case without calling a single rebuttal witness. The mathematical certainty of the evidence required zero additional clarification. The judge issued standard instructions to the jury and dismissed them to the deliberation chamber. Connor anticipated days of agonizing uncertainty, hoping for a singular dissenting voice to force a mistrial. The federal justice system denied him that tiny sliver of hope. The jury reached a unanimous consensus with terrifying speed. They signaled the bailiff that they had concluded their review before the court could even adjourn for the scheduled lunch recess. The sheer velocity of their decision telegraphed the absolute inevitable disaster waiting for the defendants. The jury foreperson stood up and handed the envelope to the court clerk. The clerk passed the document to the presiding judge, who reviewed the contents with a grim, impassive stare. She handed the paper back to the clerk to read the official findings into the public record. The word guilty echoed repeatedly through the cavernous room. The jury convicted Connor on every single count of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and felony elder exploitation. They convicted Monica on all charges of physical assault, criminal extortion, and accessory to financial fraud. The clean sweep of the indictment left zero room for appellate maneuvering. The judge did not delay the penalty phase. She ordered both defendants to stand and face the bench for their immediate sentencing. She adjusted her reading glasses and delivered a scathing judicial rebuke that stripped away the last remaining fragments of their dignity. She explicitly condemned their actions, not just as financial crimes, but as a profound moral rot. She highlighted the specific predatory nature of their elder exploitation, noting the sickening willingness to sacrifice a vulnerable family member for temporary financial gain. The judge addressed Connor directly, stating that his corporate intellect made his crimes significantly more abhorrent, because he possessed the full capacity to understand the impact of his actions. She handed down a brutal mandatory sentence of 15 uninterrupted years inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. She ordered that the sentence be served without the possibility of early parole or administrative leniency. She then turned her piercing gaze toward Monica. The judge cited the unprovoked physical violence and the incredibly malicious faked pregnancy extortion attempt. She sentenced Monica to 8 years in a federal correctional facility, emphasizing that her betrayal of her husband did not erase the profound damage she actively inflicted upon an innocent family. I sat in the polished wooden pew of the gallery, with Diane resting her hand quietly over mine. Gable sat directly behind us, observing the flawless execution of his legal architecture. I did not smile or express any outward emotion. There was no joy in witnessing the total destruction of the boy I had raised. There was only the cold, sterile satisfaction of a terminal infection being permanently excised from our lives. The long nightmare they had orchestrated was finally completely dismantled. I watched the armed federal bailiffs approach the defense table with heavy iron shackles. The mechanical click of the steel cuffs locking around his wrists sounded like a heavy vault door slamming shut forever. They chained his hands to a thick leather waist belt and shackled his ankles together. Monica was subjected to the exact same physical restraint. They were stripped of their civilian clothing and their fundamental autonomy. The bailiffs gripped their arms and marched them toward the heavily reinforced side exit of the courtroom. The heavy wooden door closed firmly behind them, completely severing their connection to the free world. The meticulous defensive perimeter I had constructed was finally complete. The persistent threats to my wife and my estate were eradicated by the overwhelming power of the federal justice system, leaving us in absolute permanent peace. The ink dried rapidly on the final heavy parchment transfer documents. Warren handed the expensive fountain pen back to Gable across the polished expanse of the downtown conference table. He had officially surrendered the master deed to the sprawling generational family estate. A massive international commercial development conglomerate purchased the prime acreage for an unprecedented premium price. The corporate buyers possessed absolutely zero interest in preserving the rich architectural history or the meticulously manicured gardens. They intended to flatten the entire magnificent structure to construct a high-density luxury condominium complex. Warren welcomed the impending mechanical demolition. He wanted the physical space where Connor had attempted his ultimate catastrophic betrayal completely erased from the earth. Within 48 hours, a fleet of heavy yellow bulldozers breached the ornate wrought iron perimeter gates. Their massive steel treads tore effortlessly through the pristine asphalt driveway. The coordinated demolition crews systematically dismantled the grand mahogany doors and shattered the imported crystal chandelier in the main foyer. The reinforced walls that once housed decades of poisoned, toxic memories collapsed violently into a towering mountain of gray dust and broken timber. Warren deliberately chose not to attend the final demolition. He felt no lingering sentimental attachment to the wood and stone that had sheltered a ruthless predator. The rapid, absolute destruction of the primary estate represented the first necessary phase of their total environmental purification. He systematically liquidated every remaining vulnerable asset tethered to his former public life. He sold his extensive vintage automotive collection to an aggressive overseas broker in a single silent transaction. He divested entirely from the local logistics firm, routing his massive liquid capital into anonymous municipal bonds. Every physical and financial tie to the city where his son had operated was permanently severed. Warren required an impenetrable financial fortress to house his consolidated wealth. He instructed Gable to engineer a complex legal entity that defied any future judicial circumvention. They established an irrevocable blind trust located in a highly secure, heavily regulated offshore jurisdiction. The trust absorbed the absolute entirety of Warren's immense liquid wealth and global investment portfolios. The structural parameters of the binding document were incredibly specific and ruthlessly absolute. Warren legally removed himself as the direct active manager of his own vast capital. A board of faceless institutional fiduciaries operating under strict international privacy laws assumed total administrative control over the investments. The trust contained a singular, heavily enforced exclusionary clause. It explicitly barred Connor and Monica from ever laying claim to a single cent of the principal capital or the generated interest revenue. The uncompromising document extended this severe prohibition into perpetuity. The appointed fiduciaries were legally mandated to aggressively combat any future contestation, utilizing the full, unlimited financial weight of the trust itself. Even upon Warren's inevitable passing, the capital would bypass domestic probate courts entirely. The strict instructions dictated that all remaining funds must be silently distributed to a private network of vetted medical charities specializing in elder care protection and legal defense. Connor would spend the next 15 years in a federal penitentiary dreaming of an inheritance that had effectively ceased to exist. Warren had weaponized the international legal system to construct a financial vault that could never be breached by greedy hands. The relocation protocol required absolute geographic isolation and supreme environmental control. Warren and Diane departed the chaotic metropolitan area and traveled 300 miles up the rugged, desolate northern coastline. They purchased a modern architectural masterpiece constructed directly into a towering sheer granite cliff face. The isolated property was accessible only via a single winding private road carved deep through a dense ancient evergreen forest. A heavy steel automated security gate monitored continuously by a private tactical firm blocked the singular entrance to the hidden driveway. The house itself functioned as a brilliant aesthetic fortress of reinforced triple-pane glass and poured industrial concrete, designed specifically to withstand severe hurricane-force winds and unwanted physical intrusions. Expansive floor-to-ceiling windows offered completely unobstructed panoramic views of the violent, churning gray ocean. The interior layout was deliberately minimalist and profoundly serene. The oppressive heavy weight of their former public life was replaced by the clean, sharp scent of salt water and the rhythmic, soothing crashing of the tide against the jagged rocks far below. They employed a highly vetted, small, dedicated staff who underwent rigorous, independent background checks and signed ironclad binding non-disclosure agreements. The entire property perimeter was monitored by a highly sophisticated network of military-grade thermal cameras and invisible motion sensors feeding directly to a secure subterranean server room. Warren transformed the remote coastal property into an ultimate sanctuary, perfectly insulated from the toxic malice of the outside world. He ensured that no unexpected visitors or ambitious opportunists could ever breach their physical boundaries again. The absolute security of their new environment triggered a profound and beautiful transformation in Diane. The severe crushing stress that had deeply fractured her fragile health evaporated entirely in the clean, crisp ocean air. The terrible dark bruises from the brutal physical assault faded completely from her delicate skin. She stopped nervously looking over her shoulder and jumping at sudden, unexpected noises in the hallway. Her natural radiant vitality returned with remarkable unexpected speed. She spent her quiet mornings tending to a small elevated botanical garden overlooking the vast dark water. She spent her peaceful afternoons reading novels in the sunlit glass conservatory, completely free from the suffocating chronic anxiety of her son's looming presence. The dangerous chronic pain in her chest subsided, and her private cardiologists reported a miraculous total stabilization of her cardiac rhythms. Warren watched his wife laugh easily again. He saw the healthy, vibrant color return to her cheeks and the bright light reignite in her gentle eyes. The permanent removal of Connor from their daily existence acted as the ultimate unmatched medical cure. They shared quiet, elegant dinners on the teak patio, listening to the cold wind sweep off the dark, restless water. The comfortable silence between them was no longer filled with unspoken, lingering fear or quiet, desperate apprehension. It was a deeply comfortable, peaceful silence built entirely on the solid foundation of their mutual survival. Warren stood alone on the expansive wooden terrace as the cold evening sun dipped slowly below the violent, dark horizon. The freezing ocean spray misted gently against his weathered face. He held a heavy crystal glass of sparkling mineral water and watched the relentless, infinite tide batter the dark granite rocks far below the cliff edge. He considered the long, brutal, chaotic trajectory of the past several agonizing months. He had not deployed his immense corporate wealth and formidable strategic intellect for petty, malicious revenge. Revenge was a flawed emotional reflex born of distinct weakness and wounded, fragile pride. He had utilized his vast resources solely as precise instruments of absolute consequence. He had engineered a perfect, flawless, mechanical response to a severe, unforgivable moral failure. He had taught a vicious predator that absolute blind arrogance inevitably summons absolute total destruction. The massive financial empire was perfectly secured behind an international legal wall. The physical coastal sanctuary was completely impenetrable to external threats. His beloved wife was finally healing and smiling freely once more. The parasitic, dangerous threat that had grown secretly inside his own house was permanently locked inside a sterile concrete federal cage. Warren took a slow, deep, measured breath of the freezing, salty air. The exhausting chaos and the deafening noise of the ultimate betrayal were finally completely gone. The profound, silent adjustment was finally flawlessly complete. The fundamental natural order of their lives was permanently restored. The fundamental lesson embedded within this tragedy is that unearned privilege inevitably breeds a lethal form of arrogance. Connor and Monica believed their sophisticated financial manipulations and aggressive entitlement elevated them above the natural consequences of their actions. They mistook my patient silence for weakness and assumed the structures of my life were ripe for exploitation. Their ultimate downfall proves that true power does not reside in loud demands or theatrical victimhood. Real power is the quiet, meticulous accumulation of undeniable truth and the disciplined patience to deploy it when the trap is perfectly sealed. Greed blinds the predator to the snare closing around their own feet. Please remember to share your thoughts in the comments section and subscribe to the channel for more content.